Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. We have some breaking news. Dana White announced the main event of UFC 287. It will be Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2 for the middleweight title. And this is going to be my reaction and early prediction for this fight. And also, Dana White announced the co-main event of UFC 287. It will be Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal. I'll also react to that fight and give you an early prediction for that fight towards the end of this video as well. But initial reaction, honestly, I wasn't surprised. If you watched my video I did 3 days ago, I believe it was, maybe 4 days ago, on Kelvin Gastelum versus Chris Curtis at UFC 287, in that video, I told you I believe the main event of UFC 287 will be Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2. So I'm not super surprised with this announcement. I am pumped, though. This was the fight to make. I cannot wait for this matchup. You go back and look at UFC 281, the main event, which was Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira 1. Incredible fight. It had everything. Elite level striking. You had, some momentum swings. You had the fact that Alex Pereira almost got finished towards the tail end of the first round and was saved by the bell. Then you had Israel Adesanya dominating in the grappling, towards those middle third and fourth rounds. And then you have the fifth round where Alex Pereira knows he's down on the scorecards and comes out looking for a finish and finishes Israel Adesanya, a man who has never lost in the UFC at middleweight, and finishes him via standing TKO to snatch the belt from the jaws of defeat. Incredible performance. And there were some people speculating, and I just think this is completely ridiculous to even say, but there were some people saying Israel Adesanya has lost to Alex Pereira now 3 times. There is no need for a fourth fight. This is what people are saying. They're saying because Alex Pereira and Israel Adesanya fought twice in kickboxing many years ago, and Alex Pereira won the first one via decision, won the second one via knockout, and now he's followed him over to the UFC, TKOs him to take the belt off of him. There were some people saying, we don't need to see a rematch. Let Alex Pereira fight somebody else. I thought that was a ridiculous statement. These are two different sports. And Israel Adesanya came into the UFC, was very dominant at middleweight, and, now he's lost his belt, and he lost it in a fight that he was winning. And this was the only fight to make. We absolutely needed this rematch. And, I can't wait to see these two guys fight again, because I'm looking back on that first fight at UFC 281. That might have been the second best UFC fight of 2022. The only one off the top of my head that I can rate above it would be Yuri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira. And Israel Adesanya, Alex Pereira 1 in the UFC was just an incredible performance by both guys. Even Israel Adesanya in defeat was a great performance up until he gets finished. And, whether it was early or not, some people thought it was early. Some people thought it was, it saved Israel Adesanya's life. I thought it was a tad early. The stoppage was a little bit early, but I didn't have a massive problem with it. And when you have a long reigning middleweight champion or a long reigning champion in the UFC at all, and they lose their belt and they lose it in the capacity that he lost it to Alex Pereira, you have to do a rematch. There is no fight I would have preferred to see in the middleweight division. I don't want to see Alex Pereira versus Robert Whittaker. I don't want to see Alex Pereira versus, Jarrett Cannonier. I don't want to see those matchups. I need to see Adesanya Pereira 2 within MMA. 2 elite level strikers. And then you have Alex Pereira, the fact that he's working on his grappling. You have the fact that Adesanya used his offensive grappling in the first fight. And then you have the fact that if Adesanya didn't get clipped with that nuclear power in the 5th round, he would still be walking around with that middleweight title. This was a fight you had to book, and I absolutely cannot wait for UFC 287, because Adesanya and Pereira, when they fight, it's the ultimate chess match. Just watching these two guys in the first fight throw leg kicks at each other was incredible. Both of them were chopping each other's legs. Both of them were checking kicks. The striking was just an elite display to watch. And, for anyone saying that they shouldn't have rebooked this, they shouldn't have made this fight happen, I don't know what to tell you, because this was the only fight to make within middleweight. And it's going to be interesting, because if Alex Pereira is able to defeat Israel Adesanya a second time within MMA, and let's say he goes out there and finishes Adesanya, where does Adesanya go from there? I have no idea. If he loses twice to the champion, I guess he's got to hope Alex Pereira goes up to light heavyweight, which I suspect he may very well go up. If Alex Pereira defeats Israel Adesanya for a second time at UFC 287, and some people will say a fourth time, if he says, you know what, I want to move up to light heavyweight and I want a shot at Jamal Hill, who just took out my training partner and coach, Glover Teixeira, Alex Pereira is most likely going to get it. And Alex Pereira is massive for the middleweight class. He would fit right in at light heavyweight. He is a massive fighter. I'm not going to sit here and call him a weight bully. If he can make the weight, he can make the weight. But the size disparity between Pereira and Adesanya in that first fight at UFC 281 was jarring. And, Adesanya is going to have massive pressure on his shoulders going into this fight, because if he loses, he's in that Max Holloway territory. He can't, the UFC's not going to want him knocking off contenders, but at the same time, he's not getting a title shot. So he's in no man's land. He better pray if Pereira defeats him for a second time at UFC 287, he better pray Alex Pereira decides to go up to light heavyweight. And if Israel Adesanya wins this rematch, most likely we will get an Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira trilogy. I believe that's what will happen. If Adesanya goes out there, avenges the loss, they'll be 1-1. And historically, when this happens in the UFC, and it's a fight of this magnitude, typically the UFC will book a trilogy. Now, it all depends how it goes down. If Adesanya goes out there and beats the brakes off of him for 5 rounds, I don't think they're going to book a trilogy. But who really thinks that's going to happen? I think this is going to be a competitive fight no matter who wins. And I think if Adesanya is able to pull it off, I think most likely we will see Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira 3 in MMA, probably November, December of 2023, which would be absolute insanity. And if Alex Pereira were to lose that trilogy match, let's say he loses to Adesanya in this second fight and then loses to him in the trilogy match, I don't know where he goes from here. He probably goes up to light heavyweight, but the grappling deficiencies there. If Israel Adesanya, who's primarily a striker, is out grappling you in the capacity that he was able to at UFC 281, and I know he's improving on it, but if he's able to out grapple you, what are some of those guys at light heavyweight going to be able to do? I know he's not fighting Glover. Glover's already retired, but even somebody like Alexander Rakic, I think would be able to take Alex Pereira down and dominate him on the ground. And Alexander Rakic isn't even primarily a grappler. Magomed Ankalaev, same thing. So it's kind of a weird scenario where Alex Pereira could, after this fight, be fighting for double champion status. But at the same time, he could be in kind of a weird situation. Alex Pereira, with a couple fights, rose to become the middleweight champion. If he loses to Israel Adesanya twice in a row, if they end up doing the trilogy, or even if he loses dominantly in the rematch, which I'm not saying is going to happen, I'm going to get to my prediction here in a second, then he might fizzle out as quickly as he arrived, to be honest. Because I know a lot of people say Alex Pereira has Israel Adesanya's number, but it's hard to imagine him having success against some of these elite level grapplers. Like, I know he has a massive size advantage on Robert Whittaker. I think he would get out grappled. I think Marvin Vettori would out grapple him. And at light heavyweight, we just talked about it. Even though they're not crazy elite grapplers at light heavyweight, I think he would get out grappled there even worse, because these guys would be a similar size to him, if not have a size advantage on him. So this is a must win for both guys. I cannot wait for this fight. I'm super hyped for it. As far as an early prediction, when I went back and looked at the kickboxing matches, okay, the first fight went to decision for Alex Pereira. I thought Israel Adesanya clearly won. The second fight, Israel Adesanya was winning up until he got KO'd. And then the first fight in MMA, Israel Adesanya was going to win on the scorecards, ultimately gets finished in the 5th round. With all that being said, Alex Pereira needs to land one punch. That left hand is unbelievable. The pressure that he puts on guys, especially when he's not worried about the takedown, is incredible. And the fact that he knew he was down and he went for the kill. I mean, Alex Pereira is a tough matchup for Israel Adesanya, because Adesanya is used to having a massive striking advantage on these guys, and Pereira can go strike for strike with him. But when I look at those other 3 fights, even though 2 of them were in kickboxing, 1 of them was in MMA, in particular what happened at UFC 281, where Adesanya was able to out-grapple him for a significant portion of that fight, my official prediction going into UFC 287 is going to be Israel Adesanya, and most likely by finish. As crazy as that sounds, I picked Israel Adesanya to TKO him in the first fight, and he was razor close at the end of that first round. And I think Adesanya is going to come back more motivated than ever. I think he's going to, him and his coaches are going to deep dive on that first fight, and I think they're going to double down on the offensive wrestling. And I know he's training with Glover Teixeira. I don't think Pereira's grappling in 5 months is going to become so high level that now Israel Adesanya isn't able to take him down at all. And we've seen how much success he had within the first fight. And I think also Israel Adesanya has the striking advantage. I know Pereira did very well striking with him, and it was a super competitive matchup. But on the feet, outside of the power advantage for Alex Pereira, Adesanya was out striking him and almost finished him in the first round. So taking all those variables into effect, I have to go Israel Adesanya. I think he gets it done. I'll probably say late round stoppage, a third or fourth round TKO for Israel Adesanya. When we get closer to the fight, I will put out an official breakdown and prediction. Maybe I'll change my mind. My official early prediction for UFC 281, I went with Alex Pereira. And then upon watching some fight tape, I switched it to Israel Adesanya. Ultimately, Pereira wins. But for my early prediction, I am going Israel Adesanya. And I cannot wait for this matchup. I am so excited. I mean, this was the fight to make. Sometimes when you have, a fight where a guy gets finished, sometimes he might sit out for a while. And I thought maybe we don't get it till the summer. I thought most likely as long as both guys were healthy, I thought we would get it in April. But you never know. So I'm happy that we're kind of getting a quick turnaround for a rematch. I didn't want to wait a year to see Adesanya versus Pereira 2 in MMA. So I'm really looking forward to UFC 287. As far as the co-main event, which is Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal, about time Jorge Masvidal stops pretending to be a politician and he gets back in the cage. And this is the fight I want to see. I want to see Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal. There was some talk of this happening at UFC Brazil. Ultimately, it didn't come to fruition. Gilbert Burns just went out there and dominated Neil Magny in his hairline, submitted him in the first round. And now we are getting Jorge Masvidal versus Gilbert Burns at UFC 287, the co-main event. And, this is a must-win for Jorge Masvidal. He's on a 3-fight losing streak. He got dominated by Colby Covington in his last fight, which was back in March of 2022 at UFC 272. Fight before that, he got brutally KO'd by Kamaru Usman. Fight before that, he got 50-45 by Kamaru Usman. And his last win was against Nate Diaz at UFC 244. I was there live for that fight. And it's been a long, long time since Jorge Masvidal got a win. And then he got 2 title shots off a win over Nate Diaz, which is insane. So this is a must-win. For Gilbert Burns, he's only on a 1-fight win streak because the fight before that, he lost to Khamzat Chimaev. And, he's been begging for this Jorge Masvidal fight for a while. I wouldn't have mind seeing Gilbert Burns versus Bilal Muhammad. So Bilal Muhammad's kind of odd man out now, depending on what happens with Khamzat Chimaev, Colby Covington, and Bilal. It's kind of a weird, dynamic within the welterweight division. But Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal makes a lot of sense. This is the fight I wanted to see to begin with. I didn't care about Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny. I thought it was a mismatch. And this is a very compelling matchup because even though I think Gilbert Burns has significant advantages in this fight, Gilbert Burns has been known to be a little bit chinny. He's not a massive welterweight. He's gotten hurt by jabs before, hurt by a jab in the Kamaru Usman fight, which ultimately led to a finish. And Jorge Masvidal has brutal KO power, whether it be a flying knee against Ben Askren or whether it be against Darren Till. But Jorge Masvidal, he's on the decline in my opinion. He's getting up there in age. It seems like, that KO win over Ben Askren, that flying knee KO win over Ben Askren kind of went to his head. He's a superstar now. It doesn't seem like he really wants to fight. Seems like, he thinks he's a bigger deal than he actually is. And, he's 38 years old. He's been around forever, has a lot of MMA miles on him, has taken, a lot of damage throughout his fighting career. But he can go out there and put anybody to sleep. And Gilbert Burns is not known for his granite chin. And I think Jorge Masvidal can get it done. But for my early prediction for this fight, I'm going Gilbert Burns. The cardio of Gilbert Burns, the grappling of Gilbert Burns, and the striking of Gilbert Burns. I just think he's an elite level fighter, and I think he could outstrike Jorge Masvidal. Jorge Masvidal does have sneaky good boxing, but I think Gilbert Burns mixing in that grappling, There's no doubt that Jorge Masvidal is a better striker than Colby Covington, but guess who won the striking at UFC 272? Colby Covington did, and he did it with his pressure and his threat of the takedown. And Gilbert Burns, I believe, will do the same thing. And I think he'll have a cardio advantage. I think he'll have a grappling advantage. I think, he'll go out there, pressure Jorge Masvidal, even if he pushes him against the cage, works him over with knees and just dirty boxing. And I think whether he gets him, I don't think he's going to get him down and submit him. Jorge Masvidal is notoriously hard to submit. Even Damian Maia, who was able to get him down multiple times, wasn't able to submit him. Throughout his career, I don't know if he's ever been submitted throughout his career, but he's definitely not been submitted in a long time. He's been submitted twice in his MMA career, but it's been a long, long time since he's been submitted. And Gilbert Burns is a guy that can submit some of the guys who aren't the elite of the elite. And I know Jorge Masvidal is kind of on the downside, but I still think Jorge Masvidal's defensive jiu-jitsu will work in this fight. And I probably see Gilbert Burns grinding him out, beating him up, and eventually winning a decision similar to the Colby Covington fight. I think Jorge Masvidal has to get a KO in this fight. And ultimately, I do think an advantage for Jorge Masvidal is that this is 3 rounds and not 5 rounds. If it was 5 rounds, I think that would be a massive favor for Gilbert Burns, and maybe even pick Gilbert Burns by like a late round, like TKO stoppage. But ultimately, it's a 3-round fight. It's the co-main event of UFC 287. My early prediction will be Gilbert Burns via decision, and I think it'll be a very dominant decision win with the grappling, with the clinch work. The other fight that was announced for UFC 287 was Kevin Holland versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. I'm not like crazy excited for this fight. This is a fan-friendly matchup. Kevin Holland just got beat up by Wonderboy in his last fight. Santiago Ponzinibbio had a come-from-behind finish over Alex Pereira in his last fight. Early prediction for this fight, I'm probably going to go Kevin Holland. I just think Ponzinibbio is kind of a small welterweight. Kevin Holland's, just came down from middleweight. I think he's long, lanky, has decent striking, has good power. And I think probably Kevin Holland defeats Santiago Ponzinibbio via probably like a 2nd or 3rd round TKO, if I had to guess. Alex Pereira was lighting him up, landing some good shots in their fight. And I think Kevin Holland is a good enough striker to go out there and outstrike Santiago Ponzinibbio and probably beat him, via 2nd or 3rd round TKO on the feet. Ponzinibbio is not going to mix in the grappling. The other thing I wanted to mention is UFC 287. What was not announced and has been rumored for a little bit was Henry Cejudo versus Aljamain Sterling. So what does this mean for the bantamweight division? Is it something they're waiting on and maybe they add that as the co-main event and then you have Jorge Masvidal, Gilbert Burns as a featured fight? Or is the UFC working on something else? Could it still be potentially added to UFC 285? I doubt it. They have 2 title fights at UFC 285. The main event being John Jones versus Cyril Gane. Co-main event being Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso. There was rumors they were going to do Nunes versus Aldana. That fight kind of fell apart and never came to fruition. So maybe they still do Cejudo versus Aljamain Sterling. But if I had to guess, they're probably just waiting. It's probably not official yet. They're probably waiting on word. Aljamain Sterling supposedly has a torn bicep. Maybe they're waiting to see what's going on with his health, what the doctors say, and before actually booking it. And maybe they throw it on the card in a couple weeks' time because we still have, a little over 8 weeks until UFC 287. So it could still be added. If not, maybe it happens at UFC 288. It remains to be seen. But if I had to guess, I'm going to say that it probably ends up getting added as a co-main event and they just slot that Gilbert Burns, Jorge Masvidal fight down to the featured fight on the main card of UFC 287. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think of all this down in the comments. Who are you picking? Are you picking Israel Adesanya or Alex Pereira? And are you picking Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal? And how do you feel about these fights? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.